our next panel is amazing. We have a really pristine lineup here, and we're going to be diving into a lot of things CRM related. How can we have better modeling? How do we have better accountability around CRM, better retention, et cetera. So I'm excited to welcome the panel, and I'll let everyone introduce themselves as we get settled in here. So Jeffrey, if you want to start there. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jeff Sanders. I'm the VP of Digital Marketing, CRM, and Loyalty at Gilt. That means I manage all of the paid media, email, push notifications, lifecycle promotions, and our loyalty program.
Great.
Sandeep Verma with 1-800-Flowers. I'm primarily responsible for all things CRM, email, direct mail, loyalty, analytics, and then helping other channels and product lines, product development, et cetera, also become, smarter with customer insights.
I'm Brett Rudolph, Director of Online Marketing at Glasses USA. Part of my responsibility day-to-day is email. I also deal with a lot of other major platforms that we're running. Basically, I have a lot of touch in campaigns that make money.
Hi, my name is Pini Akuel. I'm one of the founders and CEO of a company called OptiMove. We help brands to grow through their existing customers, so it's a very strong CRM and retention play. My background is in machine learning from academia. I know all the guys in the panel. I even work with one of them, and I've relocated to New York City about 4 months ago.
Fantastic. Let's welcome the panel, everyone. So to start off, let's start with a general higher level question. How do you define CRM? Maybe Sandeep, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so the way we look at things is an unknown visitor and a known customer, or an unknown identity, known identity, if you will, whichever you want to look at it. So when somebody lands on our site, we may know very little about them, but over time we learn more about them. Even if they're not a buyer, we can start developing a richer profile for them, like device ID, IP address, cookie ID, et cetera, that starts giving us more information about them. And then eventually when they convert, they become a customer. And then we know more things about them, what they bought. We can get demographic data append on them. So all of that is, to me, is like a journey towards CRM. It's not like a one clear answer. It's like anything you can learn about the customer that helps you do a better job in marketing to them and generating more sales is CRM in my world.
Yep, absolutely. And Brett, would you have a differing kind of interpretation?
Not necessarily different, but basically just taking anything we know about a customer or somebody that isn't yet a customer, and then pushing it basically either offline or online, Facebook, Google, essentially using anything we know about the customer to build out lists or negative lists, and push them towards the sales cycle and the repurchase cycles.
Got it, that makes sense. And within CRM, we're going to get into a lot of interesting topics over the next 30 minutes, but are there any examples of how you're using paid media in the conversation?
I think to us, it's more of an add-on, if you will. So especially for an existing customer, right? So if you think of an acquisition, then paid media plays a bigger role. Obviously, because that's where you have to invest more money, whether it's search, whether it's Google sponsored promotions, whether it's Facebook custom audience, and so on and so forth. So that's where paid media becomes more important. But when somebody is already a customer and they're in your CRM file, if you will, then you have to look at paid media more as an add-on. At least that's the way we think of it, where email and direct mail could be more kind of a direct touches to them, and paid media could be used where customer is unreachable, or we feel that an additional display or some other way of paid media could enhance our communication, remind them about who we are. So that's how we look at it.
No, absolutely. And kind of a good example of unreachable customers and using that in the paid media side of things. Jeff, do you have an example of that?
Sure. So similar to what Sandeep said, we typically start with email for our customer base, but there are a lot of people who've signed up for Gilt emails over the years and have unsubscribed, or we stopped sending them emails. So paid media is a great way to reach out to them. Earlier in the year, we actually liberalized our returns policy. For the longest time, much of Gilt's merchandise was not returnable, and we've changed that to some degree recently. And so paid media was a really great way to get that message out to folks who had perhaps given up on us or stopped getting our emails. And so using tools like Facebook Custom Audience, we actually drove a pretty good ROI from reaching out to them and really informing them of this change. I mean, it's not even a traditional direct response tactic. We measured it much more sort of in a mid-funnel approach, but it made a lot of sense for the message we were looking to get out there.
That makes sense. Are you using that both with Facebook custom audiences and promoted tweets? Like what other mechanisms are you using that specific example of unsubscribes?
I mean, for audiences, Facebook custom audiences is the easiest for us. We actually built a connection from our data warehouse through the Facebook API to automatically upload audiences, so that just makes it so easy to use the data. We're also using other media partners where we can upload email lists or hashed email lists, because it's pretty easy for us to get at our data, and then targeting specific audiences.
Absolutely. And Pini, I know a lot of your career has been focused on kind of understanding consumer behavior. I mean, do you have anything to add here, just in terms of custom audiences or using data from the email experience and other channels?
Yeah, so actually for me, the fact that ad platforms kind of like entered the realm of CRM was pretty exciting. I think it was like 3 years ago with Facebook being the first ones, and we were one of the first companies as like an external vendor to connect to the Facebook custom audience. Because we have this relationship with a lot of gaming companies, and these guys are typically ahead of the curve in terms of Facebook and stuff like that. But for me, this is a huge revolution because I've been always doing campaigns for people that you know, like existing customers.
Sure.
And all of a sudden, and it was typically like email, SMS, right, push, things like that. But all of a sudden, the media, the paid advertising, when they came into the game, it really transformed the game, in my opinion. I mean, the guys are right in the sense that if part of your list is like unsubscribed, and you can reach those people, but you can also complement all the channels against one another and essentially provide a customer with this multi-channel experience across all the platforms. What we've done recently is we've connected also to the Google retargeting network. They've opened their API, and we have this partnership with them. We actually do a cookie matching with Google on a real-time basis. So now, not only that you can serve custom audience ads on Facebook, you can essentially retarget people across the entire web.
Sure.
with specific messages to even very curated segments across Google, Facebook. Twitter has their tailored audiences, which we haven't connected to yet because I don't think it's too popular. But I think it's a true revolution, and it's just the beginning. You're still seeing teams that a lot of the people that do custom audience, they're a part of the acquisition team and not necessarily the retention team. So I think this shift needs to happen at some point.
Yeah, it's a mind shift that has to happen from acquisition more to retention side of the house.
It's still in acquisition because they manage the budgets, but the CRM people manage the segments and the identity of the customer. So it needs to clear out, I think.
So kind of follow-up question there, talking with the audience before, I think that was a common challenge, two different teams talking with one another, making sure that the budget and the data align. Any tips on how to better streamline that process to bring things to fruition, or how you've been successful at kind of merging the two different departments?
One thing that we've done is, so when I joined Gilt, I ran the acquisition team, which was synonymous with paid media. There was a separate team that was email and CRM was synonymous with email. As over the past 15 months, we've actually tried to organize around programs and channels, right? Because CRM is a program, and it can come to life in a bunch of different channels. And I've tried to make sure that the formerly known as the acquisition team is now the paid media team, but sits in the room with the CRM team and understands how email delivers CRM offers and paid media delivers CRM offers. And yes, the budget still sits there, but they're not just about acquisition, and they have KPIs, not just about acquisition. That's been definitely a mindset shift, but I think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, and I think a lot will largely depend, obviously, on company size. If we're talking about siloed departments or a more nimble startup company that everyone's in the same room. Any specific stats you could share on some of the wins you've seen with leveraging data or email engagement data in some of these other channels that we've been talking about, Facebook custom audiences, promoted tweets, et cetera?
Yeah, less so in terms of the dollars and percentages, because obviously depending on the test, the numbers vary tremendously. But all in all, I would say it's been a positive outcome where we see somebody, especially where they're unreachable. That's the easiest segments to target. And whether it's Facebook custom audience, Google sponsored promotions, or any of those nature, you start kind of going from your top decile. So essentially you could take your unreachable audience, whether it's unsubscribes or people who are just not responding and they have lapsed. And you can still do a decile-based analysis of how much they've generated, revenue they've generated for you in the past before they went dark, right? And you start from the top decile, because a lot of these approaches are more expensive than email. So you don't want to kind of reach out to your entire unsubscribed audience with these approaches. But you start doing more and more of this, you start seeing some benefits. And then you also have certain audiences that, based on the demographic profile, may react better to, let's say, direct mail,
Sure.
Where you have a little more liberty than an email. And therefore, you could say, okay, this is an email unreachable audience, and I can maybe reach out to them by direct mail. There's another segment that I can reach out by Facebook custom audience or Google sponsored promotion. So, combination of those things that we have seen success with, I think we continue to just do more work in that area.
Yeah, no, that's a really smart point. Any other feedback, Pini?
Yeah, so I've seen essentially, so here's the thing about this custom audiences tools. Obviously, if you're going to dump 1 million customers into the custom audience and expect to see great results, you're not, because it's not the purpose of custom audiences. What we've seen is that Facebook custom audience, and around 40% of our customers are using it. Once when the segments are small and very relevant and scientific, we see the same impact against the control group as we see in regular email. So in terms of cost, it's probably not as profitable.
Right.
But in terms of pure test versus control uplift, which is the one thing that we always kind of like bow to, we see the same results as email.
Yep, okay, very interesting. And someone made a comment on direct mail. I want to get to that in a bit. But first, kind of talking about segueing into retention a little bit more, and some of the factors that help set brands apart. Brett, do you have any feedback on and some tips there? What set certain brands apart in terms of retention?
I mean, it's hard to say exactly what's going to set brands apart, because at the end of the day, each and every brand has their own goal that they're measuring. At the end of the day, for us, the benchmark KPI is the amount of revenue, or the percentage of revenue overall that we're able to drive from CRM or email. And essentially, I think what we've managed to do over the last few years is not necessarily increase volume per subscriber, but keep sending a lot. But overall, I think when we started off, or when we made the switch to a new ESP, we were doing, I think, maybe like 10-15% of revenue overall, and we've managed to raise that to 30%. And so over time, the new benchmark is basically how much of overall revenue can I drive from this channel.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And Jeff, talking with you before the panel, you'd mentioned the importance of having control groups in terms of proper testing, dialing in. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, everywhere we can, we have a control group, and we have an ability to assign one of our members or customers to essentially an infinite number of simultaneous tests. And so what we'll do is, if we're rolling out a new offer or a new email, as opposed to just looking at the number of people who redeem the offer or the number of people who click through the email, we'll actually look at the test versus control group. Maybe it's an 80-20 split, 50-50, depends on the initiative, and look at what is the actual lift of that initiative over a control at a holistic group level, as opposed to just direct click attribution through an email or people who redeemed an offer. Because, for instance, we recently launched a new email earlier in the day. The hypothesis was that there might be some additional lift by communicating with people earlier. Turns out that it just sort of split the pie differently. But we wouldn't have known that if we just looked at who opened and clicked on the email, because it had revenue attached. It was just pulling from later in the day. So we try and do that everywhere we can, certainly in the own channels, and where we can in paid as well, particularly in Facebook and other constructs like that.
Got it. Yeah, and I think a lot of the feedback I've heard is that sometimes getting that granular in terms of control testing and accountability and monitoring just adds another burdensome time suck to the process. And I wanted to see Jeff or Pini, if you want to comment on that as well. I guess kind of making the case and the argument why it's so critical to justify the resources for it, and possibly any tips to make it a little bit more efficient.
I have to give a lot of credit to some of the folks who founded Gilt in the early days, because they had some pretty good forethought in terms of how to structure your data warehouse and infrastructure. Even if it wasn't that easy, we would still do it, because we sort of culturally believe it is the right way to measure marketing performance.
So I think that since I met Jeff and his team, Gilt is a very unique observation in the space, because they're very savvy, they're very advanced. As he said, like, I mean, he's preaching the same thing I'm preaching, and I'm kind of like the person that's supposed to be preaching. But still, the vast majority of retailers are not doing test versus control. They're doing open rates, click rates, revenue attribution, which Jeff would agree with me. They're all inaccurate. I mean, for sure. But the thing is, you're right, it's really, really hard, because imagine what you need to do on a database level. You need to, every campaign you run, you need to have a procedure that isolates a portion of that campaign, puts them aside, keeps them as a cohort. When the results come in, you need to cross the data of that cohort of the control group versus the test group. It's pretty difficult for most businesses. It is. Even if you have a strong data science team that you can build, so they would do 1 in 20 campaigns, they're going to run a control group. And this is one thing that we automate as a company, a big uplift that I see with our customers, even forget scientific segments, forget emotionally intelligent communication. It's just they put the newsletters in Optimove, and for the first time, they just see how much money they're making because of the control group. But it is pretty hard, and I think that revenue attribution and a lot of the metrics that people go by in terms of email are flawed, because imagine a situation that you send an email to your VIPs. They're coming every week already. And then you're saying, wow, 40% opened, I've attributed $300,000 for that email. Yeah, but what would have happened without that email? Maybe you would have gotten $295. You don't see that. And then you just go to your management, you say, hey, I've increased open rates, click rates, the revenue attribution is like 30% of my revenue comes from this and that. And I get why this happened, because the email guys never had data, and also they're not incentivized to show you the true data because they price on volume. So if a lot of your emails don't work and they still show open rates and click rates. So I think this is where things started off, but scientific measurement is something you have to start from the truth. Like really look yourself in the eyes and say, what am I doing in terms of CRM? What's the uplift?
Yeah, and a really smart point, and I think part of it comes into just having a philosophy of testing and being methodical about that. And then second, I think everyone on the panel is in agreement that brands should incorporate control testing versus just let's A/B split this subject or this content. Before we move on, though, are there any tips for how to simplify that process to get started? If there's some companies here that aren't really doing any control testing without involving the data science team or getting into really complex models, is there a quick tidbit of control testing 101?
I think that just being the data scientist here, I think that it's hard. So what I would do if I would be a small team, I would just do, again, 1 in 10, I would choose a campaign that's really important to me. I would use Excel. There's a function called RAND. You just isolate a group of people, just do it manually, do it once in a while on the ones that you really care about, and that's it. I mean, there's no, if you don't have, obviously if you have the budget and you have people that can build it and automate this thing and code it into your systems, great.
Sure.
But otherwise, it's just, I would just choose my battles.
Keep it simple. No, that makes sense. So let's chat a bit about direct mail. And Jeff, I know that you achieved a 70% lift in engagement from direct mail with a kind of revamped win-back campaign. Is that right?
Yeah, actually, it's real marketing 101. We had made some recent changes to our business. We actually looked at customers who, and it was again related to the returns issue. We looked at customers whose previous purchase they had either returned or was in a category that was not previously returnable but now was, and used direct mail to reach out to them and saw a great lift in conversion. And I say it's marketing 101 because we made sure we had the right message to the right people at the right time. And it's just previously we had sort of taken a quarterly view and used a similar offer, which is a discount of 30% off, and updated the creative to be seasonally appropriate, but hadn't thought as much about what was going on in the business and how could the message be fundamentally different.
Got it. No, that makes sense. Anyone else on the panel using direct mail from a perspective of kind of triggering based on email engagement or other CRM data?
Less on that. It's more about customer profile. So that's where the CRM data comes in, where we see certain segments, whether it's the age or HHI or something else, that's more indicative of they're likely to respond to a direct mail type of communication. And that's where we kind of reach out to that audience on a somewhat ongoing basis with direct mail.
All right, and What about SMS and push? Let's talk about that a little bit as it kind of fits into the CRM mix and overall retention. Does anyone want to jump out with some big wins or case studies around SMS push?
I know that SMS is not that big in the States. I know in Europe, a lot of people use it extensively because essentially in SMS you get 100% open rate because it could be your wife, or your husband. But I know that people here, consider it as, I would love to learn from the panel, but people here consider it as more spammish and more intrusive. But it's very effective. Speaking of multi-channel, you could do something like send an SMS and leverage the fact that you get 100% open rate and then say, in 10 minutes, I'm going to send you an email with a gift. And then you schedule the two together, and then you use the rich graphics that you can do in email. But I don't know how people would perceive SMS as a marketing vehicle.
So actually, yeah, first question with Sandeep, Jeff, and Brett. Do you have an SMS program in place with?
So ours is very rudimentary. I mean, we use it only with a small segment of our customers because they've chosen to share their cell phone number.
Sure.
We do not have a very extensive program out there that collects people's cell phone numbers. We've been kind of, careful with that, if you will.
Sure.
We do or are more active with push notification. So we see that our best customers who take the additional kind of step of downloading our app are more responsive to push notification type of communication. And then we have done some tests where we say our best customers that have bought in the past with an app, and therefore we know they have an app downloaded, right? Take a small segment, to Peeny's earlier point, take a small segment, just send them email, take another segment that gets email plus a push notification like a day later, which reinforces the same offer or communication as in the email, and we have seen better performance out of that.
Yep, that makes sense. Jeff, anything to add?
Actually very similar to Sandeep. We have a pretty limited SMS program because we've really focused on push. One, our mobile app is a very big chunk of our revenue, but number two, we actually put a strategic importance on push as email declines, right? As there's more in the email box, open rates are declining, click rates are declining. Push is our hedge against that in a sense. So it's very important to us to get people engaged in our mobile app, obviously for shopping reasons, but also for communication reasons.
Got it. No, that's very helpful. And I spoke a little bit about cadence and frequency. Want to kind of bring that back here in terms of integrating other channels, direct, SMS, email, and how you approach that. Let's kind of start with kind of identifying what's the right amount of content for your customers.
Sure. At the end of the day, kind of counter to, or in touch with what Pini had said before, was that, okay, you could send an email campaign and it drives $300,000, but by not sending, it could have, you could have been able to drive $295,000. At the end of the day, sending the email did net another $5,000. So basically what we found is the more you send, the more you earn. Obviously, there's a limit to that. You don't want to oversend, but over time, I've managed to see that an unsubscribe is essentially a function of the amount of emails they get, not the amount of time they've been active. So if it takes the average customer 100 emails to unsubscribe, okay, so you send them 100 emails, they're going to leave the list. So you can send the 100 within a month, basically earn from that customer, and then put them aside and re-engage them somewhere else. So frequency is just basically a matter of splitting your sends over time instead of stretching it over a year-long period. You're going to lose that customer eventually. So the way that I like to do it is get them to buy, because once they've bought, it's much easier to engage them across other channels.
Sure, no, that makes sense. And Jeff, Sandeep, anything you'd add to that in terms of kind of measuring LTV of a subscriber versus what Brett was talking about of kind of maximizing revenue in the short term, and how do you balance that versus kind of the long-term relationship?
I can go next, and Jeff, you can add to it. So basically, the approach we take is we feel that there is a greater value in having a customer on our email list than seeing them fall off, right? So even if the customer is not opening your emails that often, or they're not buying from that email based on last touch or whatever attribution you use, it's still valuable because, especially in our business, which is a gifting business, we know that certain times of the year, these people will become active and they'll come back and buy from us, right? So to us, twofold. One is greater value in keeping them on the list longer, because it also then helps you not spend more money in Facebook and paid media and so on and so forth. And secondly, we also feel that for each customer and maybe cohorts of customer, I should say, along the lines of what Pini was saying, in terms of scientific thinking, I think there is an optimal frequency, and that's what we feel that we should be striving for. So find the cohorts of people that, and I'm making it up, who just need to get one email a week. They may or may not buy from that, but they'll stay active. They'll, your brand will remain relevant in their mind. And when they are active in terms of buying, they'll come back to you. There's another group that needs to get multiple emails during the week or whatever period we're looking at. So I think there is a kind of a frequency balance that, over time, as you do more testing, you'll probably arrive at, and then you put kind of different clusters or cohorts into those frequencies.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% there. If I could push you a little bit further, though, how are you defining, if you could elaborate, who gets the 1 a week versus the 5 a week versus whatever the different cadence models you have?
So you look at the data, at least at a minimum, going back to Pini's point, you look at what the data shows. The data shows, for example, that this group of customers is receiving 5 emails a week. And again, just an example. How many emails are getting opened or clicked on? How many emails are getting bought from, and so on. So I think over time, as you develop that pattern, you start seeing some patterns develop among those clusters of people who are opening 1 email out of those 5 that you send them, or 2 out of 5. And then you develop that test segment and say, okay, maybe it's okay to send them just 1 or 2 emails a week and not the full frequency. And there's another group that still opens or clicks 3 to 4 out of 5 that I'm sending. They're staying on the list longer. They're not getting upset about 5 emails a week, and I can continue to do that. Maybe there is a brand awareness or some other values that are coming out of that. So I think you have to be data-driven to be able to do that.
Absolutely. And Jeff, at Gilt, do you approach it in a similar way?
I mean, we definitely think similarly in terms of member and customer cohorts and looking at their value. I would say we could be better at trying to segment across sort of demographic or behavioral characteristics in terms of our email frequency. Now we have basically a daily, weekly, and nothing. And I think we're working on making that better, but we're not there yet.
Got it. And so everything we've talked about here the last couple minutes is pertaining to email cadence. What about bringing in other channels into the CRM mix? So whether it's direct, whether it's Facebook custom audiences, if you're targeting current customers, do you have methods in place where you're monitoring or optimizing for just overall touch point across multiple mediums? Pini? No?
So I think, first of all, I think it's a difficult problem, right? The frequency thing, it's difficult. So there's a few heuristics, like things you could do, and the guys mentioned some great things. So if you take Brett's approach of saying, I want to send as much as I can, as long as I don't hurt something great. So you can just follow down subscribe rate, try to push as hard as you can, as long as you don't go past what you had, that's your frequency, right? But then, to Sandeep's point, there's other things, right? So not customers are created equal, and you can take a naive approach that would still work. So for example, if somebody's a VIP and somebody is like engaged with the brand to a great extent, that's okay to talk to them more, right? It makes sense. So if you buy from me every week, I can talk to you every day. Makes sense. I'm a big part of your life, right? And if you don't buy at all, then it should be lower. And then the best thing is obviously if you look into the data and look into kind of like micro segments and try to kind of like put the customers into different buckets of communication, that goes across all channels. So as Sandeep said, open rates and how they bought, and let's say a Facebook impression or a click on a retargeting ad, and all of those things can be mashed up together into a model that says this guy should get a communication once a week, once a day, once a month, and so forth. And lastly, I've seen people that actually ask the customer, right? So you ask the customer, what's your desired frequency? The customer says once a week, that's it. You bake it into the database, and this is how you operate. So, and then there's more kind of like more philosophical things, but I don't want to take everybody's time. So.
Sure. Any responses to Pini, or can we move on?
No, I think he's exactly on the right track as far as how you want to look at the data. You can always ask the customer. The risk is customer may tell you, don't email me more than once a month. Now what do you do, right? So that's why I would.
Because I'm not a retailer, so this is the thing that I'm missing.
Yeah, and that's why we've just started working with Pini's team. Still we are very early in our evolution with that, where we want to now leverage, OptiMove capabilities into understanding our email customers better at the micro-segment level, and then augmenting that communication with other audiences. But it's still very preliminary. To his earlier point, it is a hard problem, and you just need to kind of keep evolving, but based on data. And obviously, you want to make a bunch of hypotheses and construct tests around them, but start using data and then augment other communications to get more outcome out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one challenge, back to the asking a subscriber what their preference is in terms of cadence, is that most customers, they don't know. They think like, oh yeah, 4 times a week is going to be too much or too little, or one time a week.
Customers tell you a lot without actually telling you. Like, you can look at basically any of their actions within email and start to identify their trends. Like, we don't necessarily have a lot of technological capabilities. We're not using, at the moment, any built-on technology on top of our ESP, but if you take your entire database and segment it based on the open rates, essentially your customers are kind of going to flow through higher open rate segments based on their intent. So at the end of the day, if a customer is opening 50% of your emails, they're showing strong intent to buy, and that's a customer you can give a little bit more of a push to, either sending more or give a little bit of a higher promotional push.
Yep, precisely. And I think to Sandeep's point, if they select one a week or one a month, and all of a sudden you're locked into that cadence.
Yep.
That makes sense. So in terms of CRM, let's talk about challenges with measurement. Does someone want to kind of jump in and elaborate on Pini?
Yes, measurement is my middle
challenges.
name. So I think, so we talked about the control group stuff, and we covered that, I think. But then still, it's pretty hard if you think about it kind of like mathematically, essentially knowing what's the true uplift of CRM, right? So you can do test versus control on a campaign level, Jeff, as you guys do, and then say, okay, this campaign brought me 4,000, this campaign 5,000, and then you tally everything up and you say, last month I did like $2 million in uplift in terms of CRM. However, maybe before that you were still doing the same things. You didn't have a control group, but the money was still there. So I think the highest level of measurement, and not a lot of companies do that because again, it's more expensive, but the highest level of measurement is essentially kind of like, let's say when we start working with a new customer, they have the regular newsletter thing and the welcome series, the plain vanilla stuff they used to do before they met us. And then we would test one tactic or one strategy versus the new strategy of what they do with OptiMove. So we're going to run for like a few months. We call this kind of like forever control. So it's another group that's essentially they're painted with a different color. They're going to get the same thing they got before they met us. And then they'll be like 10% maybe. And they'll be on a separate program. It's quite challenging to do it on a database level, but if you have the tool to do it, it's easy. And then the 90% will get the new thing. And this is how we prove our value. We say, keep on doing what you did before you met us. And I want to eliminate factors like the fact that your brand is growing, like the fact that it's cold outside, like the fact that there's an economic crisis. Like I want to eliminate everything, and I want to run against the same group on the same time, neck to neck, and see which strategy works best. And that's the only way to really measure. The only way. Otherwise, if you do it on a campaign basis, the only way. So kind of like, it's kind of like living in 2 dimensions,
sure.
Right? So one is like all of these shows that revolving doors, whatever. So it's like 2 dimensions, and to create that experiment is the way to get to the ultimate truth eventually.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in terms of challenges within the organization, Brett, Sandeep, Jeff, anything to elaborate on either in terms of management or organizational challenges of getting adoption for a more holistic approach on CRM?
I think along the lines of what Jeff said earlier, it's more about the mindset and how do you kind of come together collectively, whether it's paid media, CRM, any other entity that you work with, come together on a whatever frequency, once a week, once every 2 weeks, something, and say, what's our kind of a strategy to go to market with, with the products that we are launching, with different segments that we have, different segments that are getting onboarded each month. You might have a loyalty program, so new to file people have come in this month. What's our plan for them? So I think it's kind of coming together. That should be the right mindset, and then other things kind of work out afterwards.
Yep.
We actually created a new KPI around that. So traditionally, media KPIs are different from CRM or even email KPIs. And so we created this concept of growing customers. And if you think about that, you can acquire new customers, you can reactivate customers, you can prevent people from leaving. There's ways that different channels or programs can contribute across that, and it actually became a common language across the different programs, right? Because everyone can mobilize around growing customers, month over month or year over year.
No, that's perfect. We're just about out of time. Is there any kind of final comments on this last section of CRM measurement and organizational challenges?
I just want to comment generally on one thing, that I think that we are all in this room are CRM people, and I think that the time is coming that we are going to be in the center stage. And I just watched last week this talk by this New York NYU professor, Scott Galloway. And he's talking, he's a really interesting guy, and he has this amazing talks all the time. And he's talking about the fact that advertising is getting reduced and less essential with brand building.
Yep.
So he says something like Don Draper has been beaten and hammered. It's like he's no longer relevant. And I think that for us, essentially being CRM people, we will be the ones kind of forging the brands of the future. I think branding in the future will be a CRM practice. Going back to your first question, what is CRM?
Yep.
And for us, it's so much more interesting because we were used to be kind of pushed aside compared to the acquisition marketing, right? We were always kind of second choice. Only when a company grows and there's more budgets, okay, we'll do CRM. But they're always after kind of the fresh advertising money. But today, I think that this is the future of marketing, is essentially CRM impacting the brand. That's the highest level of the art, in my opinion.
Good news for everyone in this room, right? We're in a good spot. So let's give a big round of applause to our panel here.